The gunfire began shortly before noon in Bissau. At first, residents thought it might be another brief exchange, something the capital has heard far too often in a country marked by decades of political instability. But as the shots echoed near the presidential palace, the Interior Ministry, and the Electoral Commission headquarters, it became clear that something larger was unfolding. By the end of the afternoon, Guinea-Bissau's already fragile democratic transition had shifted once again as the military announced it had taken control on the eve of a hotly contested election outcome. Hours after the bursts of gunfire faded, a group of army officers appeared on state television TGB. Speaking from the Armed Forces headquarters, they declared that they had removed President Umaro Sissoco Embaló from power. The officers described themselves as the High Military Command for the Restoration of National Security and Public Order, asserting that they had assumed full authority over the state and were suspending all political institutions until further notice. Their announcement preceded the release of provisional results from the country's presidential election held just days earlier. Both Embaló and his main challenger, Fernando Diaz, had already claimed victory, an unusual move given that Guinea-Bissau's system typically requires a second-round runoff unless a candidate surpasses the 50% threshold. The new military leadership halted the electoral process, citing what they described as a national security emergency. They alleged that intelligence services had exposed a plan involving local politicians, a narcotics trafficker with considerable regional influence, and several foreign actors. According to their narrative, this group had aimed to manipulate election results and destabilize the country. To reinforce their takeover, soldiers closed land, sea, and air borders, suspended media operations nationwide, and implemented a nightly 9-hour curfew beginning at 9 p.m. Troops from the Presidential Guard and the elite gendarmerie flooded the streets, setting up checkpoints that cut off major government institutions. Although gunfire had rattled the city earlier in the day, reports suggested that the situation had calmed by early afternoon. No casualties were immediately confirmed. Shortly after the takeover, Embaló communicated with international media, describing how he had been detained at the presidential palace alongside senior security officials, including the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces and the Interior Minister. He indicated that the officers who apprehended him did not use physical force, framing the incident as a direct military challenge to the presidency led by the commander of the land forces. Despite the political chaos, military sources insisted that Embaló was being treated respectfully. His unexpected removal, however, marked a dramatic turn for a leader who came to power in 2020 and has navigated persistent friction between the presidency and the country's powerful armed forces. As soldiers established control, attention returned to the contested election. Fernando Diaz, backed by former Prime Minister Domingos Simoes Pereira, had earlier urged the military to avoid interfering with the democratic process. He maintained confidence that he had won the election and encouraged citizens to remain patient until official results were released. However, both Diaz and Pereira were later reportedly detained and transferred to an Air Force base, adding further uncertainty to a situation already marred by conflicting claims of victory. Pereira's exclusion from the ballot earlier in the year created additional tension. Authorities said his filing was late, a decision that his supporters considered politically motivated. To understand the gravity of the moment, it is essential to place it within Guinea-Bissau's unstable political history. The West African nation, home to fewer than 2 million people, has experienced chronic instability since gaining independence from Portugal in 1974. It has endured 4 successful coups, numerous attempted ones, and frequent periods in which military leaders overshadowed civilian authority. Guinea-Bissau has also become widely known as a pivotal transit point for the global cocaine trade, with international agencies documenting persistent influence from drug trafficking networks on politics and security institutions. The military's reference to a well-known drug baron in its justification reflects a long-standing concern that criminal actors often intersect with elite political factions. Just a month before the takeover, Senior military officers were arrested on allegations of plotting a coup, signaling intense factional struggles within the armed forces. The immediate trigger for the military's intervention appeared to be the disputed election results and the fear of unrest stemming from competing claims of victory. Sunday's vote had been largely peaceful, with high turnout and minimal disruptions. But early declarations of triumph by both Embaló and Diaz raised concerns among observers, as they suggested that neither camp was willing to accept uncertainty or a second-round runoff. The Electoral Commission had been scheduled to release preliminary results on Thursday, making Wednesday's sudden gunfire and subsequent military broadcast particularly timed to preempt the announcement. The streets around major institutions quickly transformed into restricted zones, with armed soldiers patrolling government districts and blocking access roads. For the people of Bissau, the unfolding scenario felt familiar. Another collapse of a democratic process in a country struggling to build lasting civilian governance. Guinea-Bissau is a member of the Economic Community of West African States, a regional bloc that has strongly condemned the rise of military coups in West Africa. Between 2020 and 2024, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Gabon all experienced military seizures of power. ECOWAS has previously intervened in Bissau's politics, including deploying peacekeepers or issuing sanctions. This new coup, if confirmed and prolonged, positions Guinea-Bissau among a growing list of states where armed forces have overruled electoral processes, deepening concerns about democratic backsliding across the region. Additionally, Guinea-Bissau's strategic significance as a drug trafficking hub makes stability a high priority for international partners, including Portugal and the European Union, which have historically supported reform efforts in the country. By nightfall, Bissau was locked down, its borders sealed, its leaders detained, and its future uncertain. The military's call for calm emphasized that troops from all branches of the armed forces were aligned behind the takeover, presenting a unified front. The officers promised to restore order before returning to constitutional rule, though no timeline was offered. For many citizens, the events replay a long cycle: contested elections, institutional weakness, military intervention, and postponed democratic aspirations. As the country awaits clarity, Guinea-Bissau enters yet another period of transition, one shaped by power struggles, fragile institutions, and deep-rooted tensions between military authority and civilian governance.